Well, howdy folks, welcome back to the channel. I sort of hinted at it in previous videos, but I've been making space in the shop, getting things organized. I mean, mountains and mountains of boxes and extra parts and all the other good stuff that you just can't throw it away, you know. There's also, actually good stuff there too. But got enough space. I got the old inside dog here, the little princess needs to sit inside since the side windows aren't in it, and the side windows don't really keep the rain out of that Scout anyways, so it gets to sit inside until it quits raining so consistently around here. But, of course, we're not talking about that today. We're talking about that. I finally made enough space to get one of the flat fenders in here, and like I've talked about previously, this is going to be the first one up on the old getting fixed up list. So this is a 1946 Willys CJ-2A. It's kind of an early one, made mid-year 1946. 1946 was the first full year of civilian Jeeps being produced. So it's kind of cool that this one's that early. Unfortunately, it's actually one of the roughest tubs that I own. I mean, you can see that big rust in the windshield and all that. This thing's rough, but it's the only Jeep that I currently have that has the complete drivetrain with it still. And so, yeah. We'll just have a quick look at it. I've already done like walk around and all the nonsense of this Jeep, but figure I'll give you guys another tour. Toolbox is completely gone out of this thing. Driver's side floor is pretty well gone. The seat's sitting on a sheet of plywood there. So, that's pretty great. The fuel tank got moved back there, and we got the old fuel tank Toledo there. Custom door handle. Fenders got rot in them even. Takes quite a bit to get one of these old Jeeps like this to rot out, so this one's seen her days. We got great example of the original pasture green that this Jeep was when it was brand new in 1946. And, something needs to go there, and that's what we're going to work on today. Moving around, somebody patched along the bottom of the tub pretty interestingly. It's, this one's pretty far gone, but as long as the drivetrain is solid, and I think it is, we'll be pretty well set up to go here. So, without further ado, let's get down to business. If we move back here on the old grocery cart, now, the last time I had a Jeep on the channel, it was indeed that Jeep, and we pulled this engine out of it. And then the next video, I do believe, was me getting this engine all cleaned up and spiffy and torn down and everything. And it was a bit of a challenge because this Jeep sat without a cylinder head on it for, I want to say, somewhere between 10 to 15 years. And the cylinder number 4 got quite a bit of rot in it, or quite a bit of rust, rather. So I got her all disassembled and cleaned up and went through with a hone, and cylinder number 4's still got some pitting in it, but the rest of them cleaned up nice enough, and I think cylinder number 4 will be great. From sitting here just for another week or two, you can see we got a little bit of surface rust. I didn't quite get enough WD-40 or oil on those cylinders to keep from a minute amount of surface rust, but that'll come right out. And then the only other thing that I've done since this thing hasn't been on camera is I pulled all of the studs out of it. So all the cylinder head studs, all the intake manifold and exhaust manifold studs. And then I've been chasing the threads. I got a thread chaser kit, just a cheapo one off Amazon. And I've been chasing every single thread and bolt hole in this engine block. So hopefully everything's going to be pretty clean. Then the only other thing I did is I went through and I lapped all the valves. I just did that the other day, so all the valves are lapped and they should seal pretty nice. The last thing I got to do before we start reassembling is go through yet again and clean everything yet again, and then we'll be ready to start slapping. I do believe we'll be ready to start throwing pistons at this thing, and yeah, we'll get her put back together now. Well, one thing that I didn't mention that I did with the valves here, and I figured I ought to, is that I went through and I knurled all the valve guides. Now, what knurling the valve guides is it's a pretty simple process. I'm always surprised when people replace valve guides instead of knurling them. And of course, this is a pretty cheap, low buck rebuild, and that's why I went through and knurled and didn't replace the valves in the valve guides. But what the knurling process is on these things is you start with a tool that looks a lot like a thread tap. And what that tool does is it's not made to cut threads into the valve guides. It's actually made to create threads by deforming the material. And what that does is it tightens up the clearance, and then you have a reamer that goes through and reams them to the final 3/8 size. So it's not a perfect long-term solution. It's kind of a low-buck, cheap way to get a few more miles out of an old engine, and a few more miles is all I'm looking to get out of this engine, so I'm not super worried about it. And in the future, I can go ahead and pound in new valve guides into this thing, throw new valves in it, and no harm, no foul there. Reaming the valve guides is just a quick low-buck way to do this for right now, which is, I really just want to get this Jeep back on the, back on the trails, I guess I should say. Probably not on the road the way it sits, but yeah, so I went through and knurled all these valve guides, and the clearances are a lot tighter on them. I mean, there's no side-to-side play, and let me tell you, there was some side-to-side play when I started. So it definitely works, and it definitely gets you a little more life out of your valve guides. So pretty cool thing. Anyhow, I'm gonna get back to cleaning this engine block. Alrighty-o, working away at the old Go Devil here. I got all the new freeze plugs knocked in place there. Some RTV in the hole first before the plug went in, just for a little extra assurance. And I went ahead and knocked in all the freeze plugs from my new kit. One of the freeze plugs I actually left in was this one, and it looked decent, but when I went to knock it out, it had been worn so thin with rust that it would have popped out in no time. That actually would have been the easiest one to get to if it did go bad, but yeah, definitely just kind of preventative maintenance. This is an 80-year-old engine, so yeah. Go ahead and threw in new freeze plugs there, and then from there I was working on the pistons. That's going to be the next big thing. I want to get all the pistons ready, and once the pistons are ready, then I do believe the cam and lifters can go in, and then the crank, and then the pistons. So that's kind of the process we're working on, but the pistons are one of the last internal parts that I needed to clean. So I went ahead and I've gotten all the piston rings off the other ones. This is cylinder number 1, and this was actually the easiest one to get all the piston rings off of. Like number 4 was the worst one, and the piston rings on all those are stuck. They were so stuck, like the piston rings broke when I was trying to take them off. It turned into a whole mess. And that's one of those things about, like, when you revive an old engine like this, is you don't really think about how the piston rings are going to be stuck, but they can be super stuck. And even cylinder number 1 here, the piston rings were loose, but there was a ton of gunk buildup behind the piston rings in there. And that's where this little tool comes in handy. This is an old piston groove cleaner. And you can see it's got various little, if I can hold it where you guys can see it, you can see it's got various sized little bits in there that you essentially stick this over the piston on whichever ring you're working on. Right now we're on the bottom one, the oil ring, and then it just clicks right down like that. You want to make sure the little cutter's in there. That's the wrong size cutter for this one. And then you just kind of hold it in, and you work it around in a circle, and that's what cleans those grooves out. You do want to be careful, because this thing will actually take aluminum off, and you don't want to take aluminum off of these. You just want to there's just black gunk and crud that's built up under there, and you want to make it all nice and clean like those. You can see that's all nice and clean. I don't know that I have an actually gunky one anymore. I got a little ahead of myself, let's say that much. Yeah, there's one. This one still has. You can see where on the top ring land there, how it's shiny there, and then it turns to black. That's all oil gunk buildup and whatnot over the years. And for our purposes, this will do plenty fine. If this were a more professional job, you'd obviously probably just replace the pistons instead of goofing around with cleaning ring lands. And then once I get the rest of these cleaned up and everything good to go, then we'll have them all set aside, and we'll get the new piston rings thrown on there. You can see the new piston ring box right there. So yeah, good stuff, just whittling away at her. And once we get them all nice and neat, we'll have, like, I think this is number 4 actually is in here, all covered up, because I didn't want it to get all dirty again. So yeah, just trying to keep everything as clean as can be with the messiest workbench possible, the essentials. Alrighty, we got the last piston here already, and I mean, installing piston rings is pretty simple, but I'll try and give a quick little one-handed tutorial without needing to set up a tripod or any of that kind of nonsense. Well, the tripod's right there. 1 second. Alrighty, there. Hopefully that's a pretty decent view of this. So this piston's obviously, I already cleaned it. There's no shocker there. Like I said, cleanliness is key with any engine rebuild, and even an imperfect engine rebuild like this one, cleanliness is still key. So everything's clean. My hands are clean, well, as clean as they're going to get anyhow. But yeah, I mean, you just start, you got your oil control rings on the bottom of these. That can go in any way. One of the things you got to remember, and then there's these two really thin little rings. They go on the top and the bottom of this oil control ring. One of the things you got to remember about piston rings is some of them are directional. So you got to make sure that if they are directional, you get them in the right direction. And I'm just doing, they call this like rolling piston rings on. And you just kind of slide it in, and then you get it to where you have the end and you just walk it down. And it's that simple. They make like a plier looking tool that you can use to install piston rings, but you don't need them. You can just roll them on like this, and you'll be just fine. Now this number 2 piston ring, that's the one that has to be put in the right way. And I don't know if you can see it, but right there by my thumb is a dot, and that dot needs to face up. And this is the only piston ring on these pistons that is directional. And usually it's because there's a chamfer on the piston ring on the bottom side of these. So this one is directional. And yeah, same thing. These I typically start on the top cylinder or the top piston ring groove, and then I walk them down to the next groove. And piston rings are fairly forgiving, but you don't want to, obviously you don't want to push them or they will break. And then yeah, just the last one, number 1, again, non-directional. There's no dot on that one, and you just slip it in there. And one of the things that I've tried not to do on, everything I do is you don't want to drag the edge of the piston ring down the piston because you might scar the piston. So you kind of do have to stretch it out and pull it down. And I've had pretty good luck with that. And yeah, there's the 4th and final piston all ready to go. I'm sticking these in a box right here, and they're going to be covered up for right now. And we'll go ahead and give the inside of the block a final wipe down with a clean rag, and then we'll stab the lifters back in and the camshaft, and we'll go from there. Well, while I'm here and I have it in my hand, I thought I'd show you guys that freeze plug that I was talking about. So if I can figure out how to hold it in front of the camera. So there's that freeze plug. Looks great on the outside. You can see I punched a hole in it to pull it out, but from the backside, that thing is almost completely worn through. It was like paper thin. That was going to go out in no time. So it's a good thing I went ahead and replaced those freeze plugs. Alrighty, well, we're finally ready to start sticking stuff back in the engine finally. We're going to start here with the lifters. The style of these lifters, the lifters need to go in before the camshaft can. So here's the number 1. I went ahead, these are all numbered. They were numbered when I pulled them out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, numbers. This one's got pre-lube on it already. And she just stick it right up there in the hole, and then once it's in there, I'll pre-lube the underside of the lifter where the cam's going to meet it. And yeah, just go through all 8 of those, and they just slide right in. Alrighty, it's bright and early in the morning, and here's where we left off last night. I threw the crank in, didn't film any of it because it's pretty basic. You just, lube up all your main bearings, caps, and all the bearings and whatnot, and you just throw the caps on after the crank's in there, and you should be good to go. And I did not, and I am not going to talk about the old rope seal. This is the first rope seal I've ever installed. There's tons of videos and information out there that's going to be 100% better than anything I can say about installing an old rope seal like this, so I'm just not even going to talk about it. So yeah, with that in there, I reckon we're well on the way to throwing pistons at this thing next. And yeah, still just slowly whittling through it here. Once the pistons are in, I believe we can throw an oil pan on this thing. I'm sort of working in a different manner because, of course, it's not on an engine stand. I actually looked last night at putting it on an engine stand, and I don't have any of the bolts, and didn't feel like going to town to get bolts. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll do that later today. We'll see. But with all that said, anyhow, I think I'm going to start throwing pistons in. Pretty simple piston compressor, 1, 2, 3, 4. This thing's awesome because there's literally just like 4 of everything, max, 8 of everything for like valves. It's great. Alrighty, we'll give this a shot and I'll try and film the next piston install. I already went ahead and got number 1 in. Now we're working on number 2 right there. So pretty basic engine rebuild stuff, and this isn't professional big shop type stuff. This is just kind of small home mechanic, but got some oil here. This is the oil that I'm going to run in the engine. It's 1540. The assembly oil and like assembly lube doesn't really matter because after you go through all this, you should have a pretty short oil change interval once the engine's back together. So, or at least that's my opinion anyhow. So one of the first things you want to do with your piston, you can see how those 2 piston rings are basically aligned right now. You want to make sure that they're clocked, so they're opposite directions of each other. If they're lined up with each other, those gaps will let air in and you won't have any compression, which is kind of important. Set that down on that clean rag there. We'll give it some assembly lube on the bearing. And then some oil on the piston skirt. Piston skirt really isn't the important part, but while we're here, the important thing is you want to make sure your piston rings have plenty of oil on them. And of course, make sure you don't accidentally line up those piston rings. These pistons are convenient. They say which way is forward. So this one goes like that. And I usually just kind of nicely slide that down. You want to make sure you don't just jam that piston down in there because those connecting rod bolts will run into the crank, and the crank needs to stay nice and clean and polished. Okay, had to find a big screwdriver because of course I'd forget something. We got to make sure the number 2 main journal is at the bottom of its stroke, so we've got a lot of room to play. So there we go. Now we've got all the room to slide the piston into place. Plenty of room there. I've just got one of these old man type piston ring compressors. It's a little finicky, but it's worked all right for the time being. Just stick that guy on there, 1/4 inch ratchet. And this style of piston ring compressor, you kind of have to make sure it's flat multiple times. I usually don't put the piston all the way into the piston ring, so I make sure I can get all the piston rings in the compressor. I don't know that this piston ring compressor is long for this world, because now it's trying to pop out. Alrighty, one trip into town later and we've got a new piston ring compressor, one that hopefully doesn't pop apart like the old one was doing. I will say we did get quite a bit of service out of that old one, so I guess it's allowed to have trouble. Make sure that's nice and flat, and then it should just, like so. So that piston's in now, and all you got to do now is just guide it onto the connector, onto the crankshaft, and make sure that you don't scar up the journal. A lot of folks will get some rubber fuel line and slip it over the studs on the end of the connecting rod, so that when it's sliding into place, it doesn't scar up the journal. I haven't had that much trouble like with that sort of thing, so I always just kind of, You can see I got my hand around here and I'm just guiding it into place. And you should be fine so long as you're not trying to just, you know, hammer the darn thing home. And then some assembly lube on this side. Alrighty, all I got to do now is torque down the connecting rod cap, and that's piston number 2 installed. I'm going to go ahead and do 3 and 4, and we'll keep going from there. Alrighty, once we have all 4 pistons in and all 4 rod caps torqued down, the next thing we have are these little keepers. These just thread on over the nut there, and all they do is basically jam nut it to help retain that nut. I'm not 100% sure how necessary they are, but they came off this engine. I'm going to put them back on. The internet says that they go on, these are on hand tight, and then you go like a third of a turn more is what the internet says. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alrighty, pistons all in. I threw on the front timing plate cover. Pretty simple part there. It's just a big plate, and then there's a gasket that goes in there. Smart TV on that, threw her together. Timing gears are on here, so of course dots lined up, and I made sure that I actually spun the cam around until I watched the number 1 intake valve, or the lifter rather, come up and down, and that way I knew 100% sure that that's the right orientation for everything. There's no real way to get this mixed up, but I always like to double check and make sure that it makes sense to me, because if it makes sense, then you know it's probably correct. So we got that all taken care of now, and yeah, I'll throw the timing cover on, get all this covered up, and then I think we can throw the oil pan on, and this thing is coming together as quick as can be. Alrighty, timing cover, oil pan thrown on there. Good to go. We're ready to stand this thing upright here. I even threw on the harmonic balancer. Is that a harmonic balancer? I think that's just belt pulleys, basically. I don't know that that would be considered a harmonic balancer on one of these. I don't know. It's on there, though. So, yeah, we're ready to stand this thing upright and just keep whittling away at it. This is going way quicker than I thought it was going to, so things are good. Alrighty-o. Couple more steps left to do before we slap the cylinder head on this thing. I was just going through and installing the valve springs and the keepers on these valves. So, it's fairly similar to the way I took them off. You guys know there's the tapered little keepers, these guys. And all you got to do, use the valve spring compressor, scrunch up the valve spring and stick those little keepers in there. It is hard to film, but I'll try and give you guys the best I can. And then I'm going to go through and adjust the valves afterwards. Alrighty, we had a fairly productive day. I just went ahead and knocked a few more things out. Last time we looked at it, we didn't have the cylinder head on here, so I went ahead, slapped that baby on. This cylinder head needed some cleaning, but we got her all nice and cleaned up, and I went ahead and obviously got her bolted down. So I got a new stud kit for the cylinder head. We got new studs for the intake manifold here as well, which is great. I was able to anti-seize, you know, everything that I needed to. Fuel pumps on here. I went ahead and stabbed the distributor so I could make sure that number 1 was on TDC on its compression stroke, and stabbed the distributor. Obviously the oil fill's thrown in. The oil filter, man, if I were more on top of things, we actually probably could have had this thing running today, but of course I wasn't. I thought I could just run into town and get the lines made for the oil filter. It needs an outlet line, an inlet line, and then the same type of line for the line that goes to the oil pressure gauge. But unfortunately, our local hose and rubber place didn't have, they're like a 1/4 inch or a 5/16, but it's a flared fitting, a flared like swivel fitting that goes on the end. The hose, all they had were regular NPT threads, I guess. I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't in the back making the hose. But, so that was a shame. I had to go ahead and order those, so they'll be here next week. Not a big deal, I guess, but it does put the video off for a little while longer. But all's well that ends well, I reckon. So, yeah, we got this thing mostly put together. I need to go into town after work tomorrow. I'll pick up some more. I need bolts for the water pump. I broke one. and then I think I lost one. So I need bolts for the water pump. I need a new brass fitting for the oil pressure gauge. That goes back there. Of course, I managed to knock that and break it. I need nuts for the intake manifold. For some reason, they only sold the studs and not the nuts. But, I mean, I can go into town. They're just fine thread, 3/8 nuts. Here's one that was on the old intake setup. I'll just get all new nuts for that. I need bolts for the thermostat housing. That's another thing. So yeah, big trip into town in the morning, I suppose, or after work rather. Big trip into town after work. I'll get all that nonsense. But for right now, what I think I'm gonna do, I'm gonna bolt the flywheel, the clutch, and the bell housing on here. And if it doesn't get too late, I think I'm gonna stab this thing in the Jeep tonight and have it all ready. I did get my new engine mounts showed up, so we can throw those in the Jeep. And yeah, it'll be sitting in the Jeep. Everything that I have left to do is just the water pump, the intake manifold, all the lines and whatnot associated. So we have the PCV that goes to the intake manifold. We have the oil pressure gauge, but this obviously needs to be in the Jeep for that. And then the lines for the oil filter need to be installed, but I can do that in the Jeep. It's a little bit more of a pain, but if I can use all the time that I have allotted right now, I can get a lot more done. So I think we're going to do that. So yeah, I mean, I'm just going to whittle away at it. We'll throw all that nonsense on there. Clutch, flywheel, pressure plate, bell housing, all that shenanigans. And we'll get her thrown into the Jeep here. Alrighty, folks, here we are with the little CJ-2A here. I went ahead, I stabbed the engine, and I went through all the frustration of getting everything sorted out here so that we could be here now. We're ready to try and fire this thing up. Obviously, I've got all the nuts and bolts. The engine's all mounted in, bolted to the transmission, clutch, all that should be ready to go. We're only missing cooling right now. Yeah, we're just missing the cooling system right now. Oh, and the rest of the fuel system. So I haven't plumbed in any of the fuel system, and I haven't figured out what I'm going to do yet. But since this is just the engine rebuild and not the getting the Jeep driving video, we're just going to focus on firing this little Go Devil up, and we'll hear how sweet it sounds or how unsweet it sounds. I really don't know how this is going to go. We'll just have to wait and see. So I've got the little spray bottle here. I already filled up the float bowl, and it kind of dribbled in, so it should have some gas, and we can see how bad the timing is. I found out, you can see those sparks there. The coil's always on, so that's great. So theoretically, this thing should almost just fire right up. If we find there's the start button. It's trying. I think it's got a little accelerator pump in there. Let's see if we can pick up the... Oh, yeah, I think the idle's going to be on the floor. This is a $100 carburetor. It's a Solex rip-off carb. This came off Amazon, so... well, suffice it to say, I don't have the greatest hopes for it here. I was trying. I haven't touched the points at all. Well, that's a lie. I cleaned them up a little bit. See if I can find my little... that guy. As opposed to shocking myself. All right, there we go. We can watch the little light, see if it's doing things. Seems like it's on and off. There, it's trying. Give it a little more idle, maybe. Some fuel. Wow. All right. It's that easy, apparently. Let's see. We'll fill up the float bowl again and see if we can't get this in here set up so that I can just kind of bottle feed it if it's going to want to stay running. that's pretty cool. It's firing right off, so it's definitely got some quality compression in there. Oh, fire out the exhaust. Wonder, we can advance the timing and probably try that. If I remember which way this distributor spins, we'll go for that way. That might be a little excessive. We'll try that. Well, let's go for the extreme. Why not? All right, fingers crossed. See, now it's not getting anything there. Oh. Totally forgot that coil wire's all bunged up. No, still nothing. What's your problem, little friend? I don't think it's the coil wire anymore. Positive cable's a little toasty. Have we got? Well, we've got every tool under the sun here. Now let's see if we have a flathead screwdriver. Get a little light in there. All right, the points appear to be pointing. The rotor wasn't that bad, or was it? Well, it's not perfect, but should be functional. Get that guy on there. Cap's oil soaked, but it's pretty decent yet. We can find a home. There we go. That's weird, this thing's doing this weird spark issue. Like so many Jeeps I've known already. It could be the coil. I've never touched that coil. It was literally on here when I got the Jeep. I don't even know. It's probably an old AC Delco or something. I don't know. I guess we'll see if we have spark now. Not that I really did anything. It appears that we have spark now, so that's cool. Still trying to idle low. For some reason, I didn't think to touch the idle on this carburetor, but I did check the fuel air, and it was like barely, like the screw was barely in there, so it was giving it all of the fuel. So that's very fun. Definitely what you want. There, we'll try that. A little more feel. Oh yeah, we got a runner. Sounds pretty decent. If I had more freaking hands, I tell you what. I just wonder if... Oh yeah. Pull the coil wire out. We got our oil leak. Oh, darn. That's no fun. Well, I'll have to fix that. It appears that I goofed up the O-ring. But it has oil pressure. That's what we were looking at in there. And so we have oil pressure. We have a runner. It sounds great. It needs tuning. It needs a fuel system. It needs a cooling system. Obviously, I don't want to run it for a whole lot longer here without any of that. But... wow, I can't. That thing was just sitting there running. That's amazing. So, well, alrighty. With that, I'd like to thank you guys for watching the rebuild. This was not a rebuild. This was a reassembly. We're going to call this a reassembly of an old Go Devil 4-cylinder flathead engine. This has been a long one and a hard one for me to work through and all that nonsense. I've never messed with a flathead, let alone anything this small, this old, or kind of this unique. I guess these old Jeeps aren't really unique, but they're different. And it's different than anything else I've touched. So it was an adventure, I'll tell you guys that much, and I'm glad to hear it run. And yeah, stick around if you want to see this Jeep running and driving. Driving, obviously, is the next thing. We got to fix our beautiful oil leak. We got to put a radiator in here and obviously get a fuel system figured out, some sort of air filter, as well as I literally know nothing about the rest of the drivetrain. I've never looked at the transmission or axles or transfer case. I have no idea what's going on with any of that. And, you know, you might want to have a look at that. It might be smart. But anyhow. Thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you guys on the next one. And obviously, like and subscribe if you enjoy the shenanigans and want to see more like this.